When Keanu Reeves steps onto the set of The Steve Harvey Show, the atmosphere is bright. The audience anticipates charm, laughter, and perhaps a few insider tales from Hollywood. Steve is prepared to steer the conversation with his trademark humor and warmth. But as Keanu settles in and glances at the crucifix on Steve's chest, something changes. The mood, the energy, the intent. What starts as a lighthearted interview is about to delve into something profound. Because in just a few moments, Steve Harvey won't be the one posing the questions. He'll be the one struggling to hold back tears. What Keanu shares will transform everything, beginning with one surprising statement. "Can I share something? I've never disclosed this publicly." And before we dive in, let us know where you're tuning in from. We enjoy seeing your responses. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the audience settled, the excitement tangible. The familiar tune of Steve Harvey's theme song faded as he walked across the stage with his signature half-smile, cue cards in hand, eyes radiating warmth. Tonight felt different. From the very first moment, Steve sensed it. The energy felt less like entertainment and more like something sacred was about to happen. With admiration in his voice, Steve introduced his guest not merely as a Hollywood star, but as something rarer, a spirit people felt connected to without ever having met. "The media labels him the kindest man in Hollywood," Steve announced to a wave of applause. "The internet claims he's the last good guy left. I say he's the truest example of grace I've ever witnessed." The crowd erupted as Keanu Reeves entered the stage dressed in his typical, understated fashion. Dark jeans, a black shirt, and a simple blazer. Nothing extravagant, just him. He waved briefly, smiled gently, and nodded slightly, clearly uneasy with the intense attention. As he sat next to Steve, the atmosphere in the room shifted again. Less show, more authenticity. There was no hurry, no performance, just presence. Keanu spoke softly, almost as if trying not to disrupt the tranquility in the room. He thanked the audience and then admitted, half laughing and half shy, that this kind of reception always caught him off guard. "I'm just a guy trying to do my best," he said. Steve leaned in with a grin. "That's exactly what makes you unique." They began discussing not just film roles and Hollywood gossip, but also humanity, kindness, and what it means to navigate the world without armor, even when the world gives you every reason to wear it. Steve brought up Keanu's reputation, the videos of him giving up his subway seat, assisting crew members on set, donating parts of his salary to support stuntmen, camera operators, and even makeup artists. All true, Keanu confirmed. But he didn't view them as grand gestures. "To me," he said gently, "it's just the right thing to do." He spoke with a kind of quiet wisdom, never dramatic, never self-important. And the audience was captivated by every word. "Everybody's facing something," he added. "Sometimes the smallest act can brighten someone's entire day." Steve nodded, deeply touched. There was something humbling about hearing those words from someone who had every reason to detach, to hide behind status and fame. Yet here he was, open, honest, and vulnerable. The conversation shifted to how someone who had experienced so much success could remain so grounded. "I guess I've always felt that none of this is guaranteed," Keanu said. "I've lost a lot, and when you lose people you love, when life shakes you to your core, you realize that none of it makes you better than anyone." He paused for a moment, his gaze drifting off camera, perhaps into a memory. "I grew up moving around a lot," he continued. "Born in Lebanon, raised in Canada, my father left when I was young. My sister battled leukemia. I lost my partner, I lost a child, and still I'm here. Every day is a choice. You either let pain harden you, or allow it to shape you into someone softer." The words settled heavily in the room. You could sense it. People holding their breath, reflecting on their own struggles. Steve, visibly moved, touched the small crucifix that hung around his neck. He didn't speak initially, just let his fingers linger there, quietly acknowledging something only he could feel. "You speak about silence as if it's familiar," he finally said. Keanu nodded. "It is. Silence has been my companion for a long time, but in that silence, sometimes I hear the clearest things." Steve leaned back slightly, his voice softening. "Have you ever heard God in that silence?"
For the first time in the interview, Keanu paused, truly paused. Then he looked Steve directly in the eyes. "Yes," he said,
"I believe in something greater. I've questioned it, walked away from it, felt alone. But even in the deepest darkness, I could sense something, a presence, a peace. Not always loud, not always comforting, but always there."
Steve's hand closed around the crucifix. "That's faith," he said quietly.
"Even if it doesn't have a name, even if it's just something you feel." Keanu looked at the cross now, his expression shifting. He leaned forward slightly, almost hesitating, as if he were about to step off a ledge. "Steve," he said, his voice lower now, filled with something different, something deeper. "Can I share something I've never said out loud before?" Steve remained silent. He just nodded. Keanu took a breath, a long, intentional breath. "There was a night," he began. "A few years ago, I was in a really dark place. I couldn't move, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be alive. Everything felt empty. The audience was completely silent. I was scrolling through my phone," he continued, "just trying to distract myself, trying to feel something. And I came across a video. It was you discussing purpose, about faith, about how God doesn't waste pain." Steve froze. "But it wasn't just what you said," Keanu added. "It was how you said it, like you'd lived it. And you were wearing this crucifix, this exact one. And I remember thinking, this man believes in something bigger. Maybe I can too." Steve slowly looked down at the cross on his chest, his fingers tightening around it.
"I watched that clip 3 times, Keanu whispered.
"And the next morning, for the first time in weeks, I got out of bed." He leaned back slowly, almost as if the memory itself had weight. "I've never told anyone that," he said, "but I've carried your words with me ever since."
Steve was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked.
"I just spoke from the heart," he said. "I had no idea." Keanu gently interrupted him. "That's just it. You didn't have to know. That's what made it real. You weren't trying to inspire me. You were just being yourself. And that saved me."
Tears welled in Steve's eyes now. The studio lights reflected off a tear that escaped down his cheek.
"And that crucifix you wear," Keanu said, his voice now filled with reverence. "It's not just a symbol, it's a sign. You think you're just a comedian with faith, but Steve, I believe you're something more." Steve looked at him, confused but open. "I think you're a minister in disguise," Keanu said. "And I have something else to share with you. Something that might change your life the way you changed mine." The studio was silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. And Steve, still holding the cross around his neck, whispered one word. "I'm listening." There was a silence on stage that felt different from television. Not a pause between laughs, not a dramatic beat. It was something else. Something deeper. The kind of silence that only appears when truth enters the room. Keanu Reeves had just leaned in towards Steve Harvey, eyes sincere, voice soft but unwavering. "Can I share something I've never revealed in public?" he had asked. And Steve, surprised but steady, had given him space. Now Keanu sat back in his chair, adjusting slightly, like someone about to open a door that had been closed for too long. The audience was utterly still. No whispers, no fidgeting, just pure human attention. Keanu took a slow breath. His eyes remained fixed on Steve, but his mind seemed far away. "There was a time in my life," he began, "when I couldn't find a reason to wake up." Steve didn't flinch, but his body stilled as if his soul had leaned forward. "I had lost people," Keanu continued, "not just to death, but to life, to time, to pain, one after another." His voice was calm, but each word seemed to echo off the walls of something buried. "My daughter was stillborn," he said gently, "and just a few weeks later, I lost Jennifer. She was the closest thing I had to home." He paused, then looked down at his hands for a moment. "I don't think I cried right away. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. So quiet you forget you're alive." The audience sat breathless. Some leaned forward, some leaned into themselves. "I kept working," he said, "kept doing interviews, kept playing roles, because it's easier to disappear behind a character than to be yourself when you're broken. Steve's fingers found the crucifix around his neck again. Not for show, just instinct, just grounding. But eventually, Keanu continued, the noise outside couldn't drown out the silence inside. And one night, that silence almost won. Steve tilted his head, his eyes searching Keanu's face for what was coming. It was late, Keanu said. I was alone. I hadn't slept in days. I didn't want to eat, didn't want to talk, didn't want to be. So I sat there in the dark, just sitting for hours. A long pause. No prayers, no thoughts, just the thought after all thoughts. That kind of emptiness. Then something in his tone shifted, barely. And that's when it happened, he said. I picked up my phone, just scrolling, not looking for anything, just trying not to feel. He breathed in slowly. And I saw a clip. It was you. Steve blinked, visibly caught off guard. You were on stage, Keanu said, talking about storms, about how God doesn't waste pain, about how sometimes the thing that's breaking you is actually breaking you open. Steve nodded slowly. He remembered that moment. I don't know why I stopped scrolling, Keanu admitted, but I watched the whole thing, and then I watched it again. His voice cracked just slightly. You said, if you're still breathing, it means God's not finished with you yet. And for some reason, that sentence resonated. It felt like someone finally saw me. Not the actor, not the man in headlines, just the man in the dark. Steve exhaled softly, his hand now resting fully over the crucifix. Keanu leaned forward now, elbows on his knees, voice almost a whisper. And I need you to know, Steve, that night I stood up. He let that sit for a moment, not because I was healed, not because I suddenly had answers, but because for the first time in a long time I felt seen. And that was enough to make me move. The words struck Steve right in the chest. He didn't hide it. His eyes were wet, his lips pressed together, trembling slightly. Keanu looked at him with a mix of gratitude and reverence. I never intended to share this story, he said. But sitting here, looking at you, I realized I had to. Steve's voice came slowly, thick with emotion. Man, I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Keanu replied. You already did, years ago. He gestured toward Steve's chest. And that crucifix you wear, that's what caught my eye first. Before your words, before your message. That symbol, in that moment, was a lighthouse. Steve's gaze dropped to the cross again. His hand tightened around it instinctively. I kept watching your message over the next few days, Keanu said. Not because it fixed me, but because it reminded me that healing doesn't require answers, just hope. The audience remained quiet, some now visibly emotional, a few wiping their eyes, others simply absorbing the moment. Steve leaned back, swallowing hard. You think you're just talking, Keanu said, just entertaining, just surviving. But that night you were doing more than that. You were lifting someone who didn't have the strength to stand. Steve closed his eyes for a second, taking it all in. I needed to tell you, Keanu continued. Because the world knows you as a host, a comedian, a motivator. But I don't think that's the full truth. Steve looked back at him, still stunned. I think, Keanu said slowly, you're a minister in disguise. A long silence followed. Steve's eyes filled again. He shook his head softly, but not in denial, more like humble disbelief. You ever wonder why people are drawn to you? Keanu asked. All the time, Steve admitted. Keanu smiled gently. It's because they're not just hearing your voice, they're feeling your spirit. You carry something sacred, man. Steve laughed a short, broken laugh. I'm just trying to make it like everyone else. That's what makes it real, Keanu said. You're not trying to be anything other than who you are, and because of that, you reach people you'll never meet. He looked toward the audience now. People in rooms like this. People on the other side of a screen. People sitting in silence like I was. Then he turned back to Steve. And I know it's hard sometimes carrying that kind of weight, not knowing if what you're doing even matters. Steve nodded slowly, visibly affected. But I'm here to tell you, Keanu said. It does. And just when the moment seemed to reach its emotional peak, Keanu's expression changed slightly, undeniably more serious, more intentional. He leaned in, lowering his voice.
Steve, the way you carry that crucifix, it's not just a symbol. It's a sign, a message. And tonight, I have something to share with you. Something that might change your life the way you changed mine. Steve looked up, startled by the shift. The crowd leaned in, sensing it too.
What do you mean? Steve asked softly. Keanu's eyes didn't blink.
I've held these words for years, he said. They came from you, and tonight I need to say them back to you. Steve sat still, breathing unevenly.
Keanu nodded once. Because I think you may have forgotten the power they hold. The weight of the moment hung thick in the air. Steve Harvey sat frozen, eyes still fixed on Keanu Reeves, who had just leaned in with a calm, unwavering voice and said, Tonight I need to say those words back to you, because I think you may have forgotten the power they hold. The studio was silent. Even the background hum of the cameras seemed to fade as Keanu sat up straighter, breathing deeply, as if preparing to revisit a sacred memory. I remember the lighting in the video, he began. It wasn't perfect. It was a little grainy. You were on stage holding a mic in one hand, your other hand resting right over your chest, over that cross. Steve nodded slowly, already feeling the emotions swell inside him. You were discussing purpose, Keanu continued, but not in some polished, rehearsed way. It was as if you were fighting through your own story while sharing it. You said pain has a language, that when someone who's been through something speaks, it cuts through the noise. He paused, locking eyes with Steve, and then you said something that stayed with me. God doesn't always call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Steve's lips parted just barely. His hand went to his chest again, to the same crucifix Keanu had described. You said that God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things, Keanu added. That even if you think you're just telling jokes, just paying bills, just trying to make it to tomorrow, God might be using that right there to change someone's life. Steve leaned forward, elbows on his knees now. That old clip was coming back to him, the one he had recorded years ago after a show, when he had hit a low point and decided to speak from his soul, no script. And I realized something that day, Keanu said. It wasn't just your words. It was the way you said them. You believed them. And that belief, it ignited something in me. He looked down for a second, his voice softening. I had lost my sense of direction. The grief, the silence, it had buried my compass. But when I heard those words and saw the way you carried them, it reminded me that even in my lowest moment, I wasn't invisible. He looked back up at Steve. You were a stranger to me, but in that moment, you became a beacon. Steve let out a long breath, the kind that comes from the chest and carries years of weight. Keanu smiled gently. And that's the thing about beacons. They don't always know who's watching. They just keep shining. There was a long pause. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, just full. Full of what had been said, full of what hadn't yet been said. Then Steve spoke, his voice lower than before. You know, sometimes I wonder if I've done enough, he admitted. If all this comedy, hosting, speaking, actually means something. Keanu leaned in slightly. It does, he said. I'm living proof. Steve shook his head, overwhelmed. I was just trying to survive, man. I wasn't trying to save anyone. And that, Keanu said, is exactly why you did.
The audience stirred, small sounds of emotion breaking through the stillness.
A few people wiped their eyes. Others simply sat in quiet reverence. Steve looked out toward the crowd, then back at Keanu. You said something changed in you when you saw that video, he said. What was it? Keanu sat with the question for a moment, then replied, Hope. He said that maybe the silence wasn't the end of my story. That maybe, just maybe, God still had something for me to do. He looked directly at Steve again. And seeing that crucifix on your chest while you spoke about divine purpose, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was confirmation, a quiet reminder that light finds a way in, even through a screen.
Steve nodded slowly, visibly moved.
You reminded me, Keanu added, that I wasn't forgotten, that my story wasn't over. He paused again, letting the moment breathe, and I remember exactly what you said, Steve, word for word. I've carried it with me for years, and tonight I need to say it back to you, because maybe you've forgotten how powerful it really is. Steve looked at him, a question forming in his eyes. Keanu took a deep breath, eyes steady. Sometimes you're not the one being rescued. You're the one doing the rescuing, and you don't even know it. Steve's lips trembled slightly. You think you're just talking, but you're actually testifying. Keanu leaned back slightly, giving the moment space to land. Steve covered his face with his hands for a second. Then he looked up, eyes glistening. You remembered all that? He asked. I needed to, Keanu said simply, because I wasn't just hearing you. I was being lifted by you.
Steve sat back in his chair, hands clasped now as if trying to hold himself together. The room felt like it had shifted again. More than just a stage, more than just a show. It felt like healing was happening right there under the lights. Keanu's voice came one last time, softer than before.
And maybe you don't hear this enough, but Steve, you matter. Not for what you do, but for who you are. You carried faith into places where people had none left, including me. Steve couldn't respond right away. His chest rose and fell with slow, emotional breaths. The moment was quiet, until Keanu added almost in a whisper, and today, I have something to tell you that might change your life, just like you changed mine. Steve looked up, and the entire studio held its breath for a long moment.
Steve Harvey said nothing. He simply sat there, absorbing everything Keanu had just shared. The gratitude, the testimony, the truth. Then slowly, Keanu leaned forward again, this time with a different presence, as if what he was about to say didn't come from memory, but from something sacred. I remember every word of that message, he said, and I want to say them back to you now, not just as a reminder, but as a mirror. Steve's eyes locked on his, unmoving. And then, with calm reverence, Keanu began to recite. God doesn't always use the mighty or the perfect. Sometimes he picks the broken, the ones nobody expects, because they know how to reach people the strong can't. Steve blinked slowly, the words washing over him like a tide he'd forgotten how to stand against. You don't need a pulpit to preach, Keanu continued. You don't need a robe to be called. You don't need a church to carry the word. Keanu's voice didn't waver. He wasn't quoting a clip anymore. He was delivering a message. Sometimes your pain is your ministry, and sometimes your comedy is just the disguise God uses to send people hope. Steve's lips parted, but no sound came out. He was completely undone. Then Keanu looked at him gently, like someone delivering a revelation instead of a compliment. You thought you were just making people laugh, he said, but you were doing more than that. You were reaching hearts, saving lives, carrying light.
He let those words settle, before adding the one line that would break Steve's composure.
You're a minister, Steve. You just happen to wear a suit instead of a collar.
Steve's head dropped. One hand went to his face, the other gripped the cross at his chest. Tears spilled freely now. No shame, no restraint. The audience didn't move. No applause, just silence. Sacred still, holy silence. And then Keanu said something else, soft, almost fragile. The way you carry that crucifix? It's not just a symbol, Steve. It's a signal. And tonight, I think it's pointing at something bigger than both of us. Steve looked up, tears still falling. Keanu inhaled deeply, as if steadying himself for what came next. Because tonight I have something to tell you, something that may change your life. Steve's expression shifted, equal parts fear and awe. Keanu leaned in, voice quiet but certain. Like, you changed mine.
Steve wiped his face slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he lowered it from his eyes. The tears hadn't fully stopped, but now they mingled with a kind of stillness, a reverence that made even the lights on set seem softer. Keanu sat quietly across from him, as if waiting for the right moment to speak. And then, with a gentle exhale, he said it. Steve, there's something I need to tell you. A sentence that's lived inside me for years. And I've never said it out loud, until now. Steve nodded slowly, his eyes searching Keanu's. His voice was barely above a whisper. Go ahead. Keanu leaned forward. There was no performance in his voice, only truth.
God uses his chosen ones, he began, even when they think they're just telling jokes. Steve blinked, not moving. Keanu continued. You thought you were just entertaining, just trying to bring people joy. But Steve, you were saving lives. A single tear slipped down Steve's cheek again, this one different. This one carried understanding. Keanu nodded, confirming it with a look that said, This is real. You saved mine, he said softly. And for a moment, No one in the room breathed. Even the cameras seemed to bow their heads. Steve leaned back, a sound escaping his lips. Part laugh, part sob, part disbelief. "I was just trying to make it, man," he said. "Trying to get through my pain like everybody else." Keanu nodded again. "Exactly. That's what made it holy." The words lingered deep, permanent. Then, something unexpected happened. Steve stood up. His body shook. Not from weakness, but from something else. Something sacred.
He didn't speak. He simply touched the crucifix again and stared at Keanu.
Keanu stood still, face to face with Steve Harvey, both men now on their feet. The studio was frozen in time. Steve had just asked a question that came not from doubt, but from deep, aching wonder. "Why me?" And Keanu had answered without hesitation.
"I'll tell you."
The camera pushed in slowly. The audience didn't move. No one said a word, because they knew whatever Keanu was about to say next wasn't just for Steve. It was for all of them. "Why would he pick me?" Steve asked.
Keanu stepped forward.
"I'll tell you." The crowd was still. Some wept silently. Some held hands. No one reached for their phones. No one wanted to leave this moment.
Steve finally let out a soft breath. His voice was cracked but steady. "I've thought about quitting before," he said, walking away from the spotlight. "From all of it."
Keanu nodded, as if he already knew.
"I have, too," he replied, "more than once." They both sat back down now, not because the moment passed, but because it had deepened, shifted, settled.
Steve leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes far off. "I've asked God more than once. What do you want from me?" he said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough to speak on faith, not clean enough, not consistent enough." Keanu nodded again, his voice soft and certain. And that's exactly why he chose you."
Steve looked up. "Because your voice doesn't sound like a preacher's," Keanu said. "It sounds like someone who's been through it. Someone who knows what it's like to lose, to struggle, to cry in the dark. There was no applause, no music, just presence."
And Steve looked at Keanu, eyes sharp with something else now, something searching.
"Do you really believe," he asked, "that we can still have faith in a world like this?"
The question hung in the air, heavy, timeless. Yes. And the way Keanu looked back at him, calm, sure, almost glowing, with something beyond himself, told everyone in the room that what he was about to say next would not be forgotten. Steve asked, "Do you really believe we can still have faith in a world like this?" Keanu looked at him, ready to answer. And what he said next would become one of the most replayed lines in television history. Steve's question lingered in the air like incense. "Do you really believe we can still have faith in a world like this?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He simply looked at Steve, calm but intense, as if the words needed to form in his soul before they reached his lips. Then finally, he spoke. "I believe faith is the only thing that isn't pretending."
Steve tilted his head, listening. "In Hollywood, we follow scripts," Keanu said on camera.
"Everything is written, edited, controlled. We rehearse pain, we fake joy. But faith," he paused, "faith has no director. It demands truth. It demands surrender." He leaned in slightly, voice softer now but more powerful. "Faith isn't glamorous. It doesn't win awards. It's not invited to after parties. But it saves people quietly, deeply, forever." Steve nodded slowly, his heart in his throat. "Hollywood shows you how to act," Keanu continued. "But faith shows you how to live." A ripple moved through the audience. Not a sound, but an energy, a shift. "Faith is the only path," Keanu said, "that has no spotlight, no camera, no applause. It's the one place where it's just you and God."
Steve couldn't speak. He simply placed his hand over his heart and nodded, overcome.
"I didn't grow up with religion," Keanu admitted. "But I've come to believe that faith is real, not because someone preached it to me, but because it met me in the silence. It met me when the lights were off and no one else was around." He looked at Steve, eyes full of something eternal. "And it met me through you." Steve looked at him, trembling. "Not the Hollywood version of you. The real you. the broken you, but still standing version, the man with a cross on his chest, who had the courage to speak life into a stranger through a screen. Keanu stood up, and after a beat, Steve stood with him. They looked at each other for a long moment. Two men, two lives shaped by pain, now bound by grace. Then Keanu stepped forward and opened his arms. Steve walked in without hesitation. They embraced not as actor and host, but as brothers. The audience stood slowly, reverently. No one clapped yet. It didn't feel right to interrupt the sacred. Finally, Steve turned to the crowd, his voice cracked but full of spirit. "I've had many moments on this stage," he said, "but this was the greatest gift I've ever received." He closed his eyes for a second, then lifted his head, and with sincerity he whispered, "Let's pray." In that studio, in front of millions of viewers, two men with stories of pain became instruments of healing, and for a moment, the world believed again. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe, and help us bring you more exciting stories involving celebrities. Here, you will be updated every day on the world of celebrities. See you soon.